Welcome to Deep Dive Daily. Today, we're going to unpack one of the most powerful, and let's be honest, one of the most controversial parts of the Indian Constitution, the emergency provisions. These are the tools designed to protect the nation when it's most vulnerable, but they also carry a tremendous amount of risk. And this really is the fundamental question, isn't it? It's the tightrope that the framers of India's constitution had to walk. They needed something strong enough to protect the country from falling apart, but not so strong that the very act of saving the democracy ends up destroying it. It's a massive dilemma.
And here's the genius of their solution, summed up perfectly by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. He envisioned a constitution that could change its shape. Think of it like a transformer. In normal times, it's federal. Power is shared between the center and the states. But in a crisis, it can morph into a unitary system where all power flows to the central government. It's a unique constitutional safety valve, built right in.
So how does this whole safety valve system work? Well, here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the different types of emergencies, then dive deep into the book one, the national emergency, and its most famous test case in 1975. After that, we'll see how safeguards were put in place, look at the very controversial president's rule, and wrap it all up by asking that big question: is this power really necessary?
Okay, let's jump right in with the basic framework. The Constitution doesn't just give the government one big red button to press in a crisis. It's actually more nuanced. It provides three distinct tools to handle three very different kinds of trouble.
And here they are. First, you've got the national emergency under Article 352. This is the heavy hitter for threats to the whole country. Then there's President's Rule under Article 356, which is more surgical, aimed at a single state. And finally, the financial emergency under Article 360. Each one has its own trigger and its own set of consequences.
All right, let's zero in on the big one, the national emergency, Article 352. This is the ultimate power in the constitutional toolkit, and it's reserved for the most serious situations imaginable, like war, an invasion, or a full-blown armed rebellion. And when it's triggered, the effects are, well, they're drastic. The entire political system transforms. That federal structure we talked about, it basically goes on hold, and the country becomes unitary. The central government can make laws about anything, even state matters. Parliament can extend its own term. And, most critically, some of your fundamental rights as a citizen can be suspended. It's a huge deal. Now, theory is one thing, but this immense power was put to a very real and very controversial test back in 1975. The government of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi declared an emergency based on internal issues, which sparked a massive firestorm of criticism. It forced the whole country to ask, was this safety valve just used as a political weapon? A huge part of the problem came down to just two words: internal disturbance. That was the justification used. But what does that even mean? Critics argued it was so dangerously vague you could use it to justify almost anything. And this experience, this debate over wording, would directly lead to a major change in the Constitution itself. And get this, there was another massive procedural issue. The Prime Minister advised the President to declare the emergency, but she did it without a formal written recommendation from her cabinet. The cabinet was told about it after the fact. This revealed a gigantic loophole in the process. So in the aftermath of the 1975 emergency, there was a major political shift, and the new government made it a top priority to make sure that never happened again. This led to one of the most important constitutional reforms ever, the 44th Amendment Act, designed specifically to build guardrails against misuse. The amendment was a systematic fix. First, it threw out that vague phrase internal disturbance and replaced it with the much more specific armed rebellion. Much harder to misinterpret that, right? It also closed that procedural loophole. Now, a written recommendation from the entire cabinet is mandatory. And it added more checks and balances, like making the proclamation reviewable by the courts and requiring Parliament to reapprove it every 6 months with a supermajority. Now, this concept of judicial review is absolutely key. It means the government doesn't just get a blank check. Its actions can be examined by the courts. And the Supreme Court really cemented this in the landmark Minerva Mills case in 1980. They made it crystal clear that an emergency proclamation can be struck down by a court if it was made in bad faith or for reasons that have nothing to do with a real crisis. Okay, so while all these safeguards were being built around the national emergency, another provision, Article 356, has been the source of endless controversy, mostly because of how often it's been used. This is President's Rule, the tool for when a single state's government breaks down.
And you know what's fascinating is that Dr. Ambedkar himself said he hoped this article would be a dead letter, basically a power that sits on the books but just gathers dust. He saw it as the absolute, very last resort you turn to if a state government simply couldn't function anymore.
A dead letter, he hoped. Well, the reality has been, a little different. It's been used more than 125 times, a far cry from gathering dust. And that's why over the years, critics went from calling it a dead letter to calling it a deadly weapon, claiming it was being used by central governments for political reasons against states run by their opponents.
So, with this power being used so frequently and at times so arbitrarily, the Supreme Court had to step in again. This brings us to another monster of a case, the 1994 S.R. Baumai case. This judgment literally wrote the new rulebook for how and when Article 356 could be used. And the Supreme Court laid down some serious ground rules. It said, yes, this is subject to judicial review. It put the burden of proof squarely on the central government to prove the state government had failed. It also said you can't just dissolve the state assembly right away. And crucially, a government's majority must be tested on the floor of the House, not just in the opinion of the governor. So, just to quickly recap the difference, national emergency is for the whole country, for huge threats like war, and it can affect your fundamental rights. President's rule is state-specific, for a constitutional breakdown, and it doesn't touch fundamental rights. In a national emergency, state governments keep working, just under central direction. Under president's rule, the state's elected executive is dismissed. Big difference.
And all of this brings us right back to where we started, back to that fundamental debate that was happening in the Constituent Assembly, and frankly, is still happening today. Are these powers an essential tool for keeping the country safe, or are they a built-in threat to democracy itself?
These quotes from those original debates just frame the two sides perfectly. On one hand, you had supporters who called these provisions the very life breath of the Constitution, a necessary emergency power. But on the other side, you had critics who feared they were a chapter of reaction and retrogression, something that put way too much power into the hands of the executive. And that leaves us with this enduring question. The entire history of India's emergency provisions is really the story of a democracy trying to figure this out. The journey from that vague internal disturbance to armed rebellion, the creation of judicial firewalls in cases like Minerva Mills and S.R. Baumai, it's all part of a continuous effort to refine its most powerful shield, to make sure it protects the nation without consuming its liberties.
And that is our explainer on this incredibly complex constitutional balancing act. If you found this breakdown useful, please do us a huge favor and hit that like button and subscribe to Deep Dive Daily for more. Thanks so much for watching.